Hey, good evening. Greetings. Hey, listen, I want to have a talk right now with the LGBT community. Specifically, if you're amenable, I'd like to share some things with the future leaders of the LGBTQ community. I want to say hello, and I want to say I hope you're having a peaceful night and that you're safe. That's my first thing is I really hope that you're safe and that you're having a good night and that you're around in a environment where people support you and that they're real with you. Regardless of wherever you are or whatever else is going on, that they're real with you and you can be real with them. Now, I, on the record, was saying at some point in the past I used to identify as a lesbian. I considered it a political identity. I don't anymore. And I also have very strong personal feelings about political movements identified as transgender. But that doesn't mean that somebody that identifies as transgender is somebody that I would negate or vilify. Everybody has a right to self determine, and that's how I see it. This concept of our body being our first home, and we have a right to self determine how we want ourselves represented, how we want to represent ourselves, and to engage with other people in understanding what is an appropriate manner in addressing us respectfully and what is a appropriate manner to address them. That also includes challenging people. You see, where I come from, contestation and confrontation is a sign of interest. You don't care about somebody, you don't read their stuff, you don't listen to what they say. You may make an aesthetic comment, maybe a meme, a stereotype, a cliche. But when you have an interest in somebody, you might even have an expectation of something out of them. And that expectation can sometimes lead to disappointment. And that disappointment can have very significant consequences. So when somebody argues with me, even if they say something that years later I have to deal with, it's a sign of interest initially. They took the time to read something, they took the time to hear something. They had enough of an interest in me to take me seriously enough, even if it meant to challenge me. I'm not going to lie. I haven't had that in my life that I know of for a long time. I miss it. I guess I'm not taking it as seriously as I'd like to hope I would be. I like it. I like the scathing critique, especially if it's good, and especially if it's correct. Now, if you're a young leader and you're in the position where you're coming into your own identity, you're trying to figure some things out for yourself, then it's important that people support you when you have protest and when you have criticism. But I was exposed to a time frame during which there was, I understood to be, an emphasis on inappropriate valorization of youth leadership. I experienced it myself. I was on the National Political Committee of an organization. I was the co director of not only the Chicago local of that organization, but I was also the co director of the Queer Commission. I wish they had taken me more seriously. I wish they had taken me seriously enough that when they wanted to critique what I was trying to do at the time, that a couple of years later, when some of the material conditions changed, that they didn't just write me off and leave me to figure it out on my own. Right? So that's why, despite the fact that you might be addressing things in a context I don't agree with politically, it's not acceptable. Like it or not, I'm also part of your history. When I was the member of the National Political Committee of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I believe 1998 through 2000, I was also the co-director of the Queer Commission. It had previously been called the Gay and Lesbian Commission, but me and a colleague of mine who was male-bodied and identified as gay decided we were going to be the co-directors, and we named it the Queer Commission. There was a very specific reason why we chose to call it the Queer Commission and not the LGBT Commission. Queer was a kind of political provocation at that time. It implied a refusal to assimilate to heteronormativity, and it also implied an understanding that challenging heteronormativity and the legacy of patriarchy also allowed for an expression of a form of revolutionary identity challenging capitalist and colonization of our bodies for people that had same sex attractions. That you could be queer and not necessarily have a sexual identity that was geared toward the opposite sex and or addressing concepts of understanding your relationship with your body and expressions of archetypical female presentations or male presentations, including female or male presentations that might complement somebody of the opposite sex in a way that could still be intentionally revolutionary, specifically about challenging the relationship of patriarchy and the processes of domination in power relationships, even at the most intimate. And this was why queer was chosen as opposed to LGBT or Q. My colleague actually had his mother was an artist, and she hand drew the illustration that was the cover of the pamphlet. We wrote the pamphlet together. There were numerous sections where we explicated what we understood to be queer issues. We wrote about them, and we put it together in a pamphlet. And this used to be something that a lot of people did when they were organizing for political rights in this country and around the world. They would come up with revolutionary pamphlets. Now, there were quite a few people, even in the DSA, they didn't like it. And then there were people that understood some context of the cover art, and they didn't like it. To be honest with you, I have a challenge myself these days. Would I want to be associated with the manner in which the visual representation of that specific polemic may mean something in the current context? Well, I think for people that have a particular understanding of the uniquely revolutionary, provocative, and dangerous aspects of the history of queer people throughout the world, I'm not ashamed at all. Do I agree with all of it? Well, I haven't written in a long time. I may not, but I'm not ashamed of it. And if you were to find it, I would hope that whoever it would be with whom you would share it would be candid with you. They would be candid with you, especially in discussing the class implications of what it means to be LGBTQ. My understanding and belief was that a lot of how gay identity emerged in the United States, specifically for female-bodied women, had to do with the changing conditions of capitalism. And in the advancement of industrialization, there were possibilities for women to exist outside of being claimed in a marriage relationship with a man. As a matter of fact, in certain parts in the early days of aspects of industrial development in the United States specifically, a woman that looked feminine in a particular way had an advantage in the labor market in a manner that a woman that was not stereotypically or classically feminine did not have. And so a lot of intimate relationships between the butch and the femme developed based on the material conditions. A lot of butch women could pass, but not all of them could. And if you couldn't pass as a man, you might be in danger. Social expectations of what was appropriate for women in the labor market had a lot to do with what she looked like, her personality, how she worked with her boss. That meant how she dressed, how she talked, how she represented him in whatever the entry-level positions were for women at the time. But for a woman that had a more butch affectation, being able to go and work with the guys, work on the line, work in the field, work a manual job, did something for her spirit, did something for her personality. Some of us prefer to be in communion, to be in fellowship with other people, working with our hands, creating something tangible, and then being able to share what it means to have created that and to see other people enjoy it. Different people had different preferences. Well, women were trying to explore these possibilities for their lives without being the property of a man. And in the course of that, women developed their own relationships with each other based upon those uniquely female experiences that had a different gendered expression, one that was not publicly discussed or declared, and one that did not enter the realm of academia for a very long time, including as a participant in academic programs. This is a very, very specific part of our history we don't hear enough about. And now that we're in the situation we're in, it actually has a lot to offer people, especially people that might be dealing with situations concerning their immigration status and or situations about issues concerning their family and other things about their environment that are changing our relationship with our environment and a relationship with what we previously knew historically as what was the foundation for appropriate work, appropriate definition with our job, and appropriate considerations of the kind of leadership we want in our lives and in our world. Now, when I understood being a lesbian from this perspective, I said that's who I am. But at some point, I also had to mature in my understanding of the history of my own movement with an understanding that there was changes that came as later developments came. And then we had to learn about what it meant for some of our early matrons to address feminism from a perspective of having a radical lesbian identity, one that was grounded in a repudiation of the male-embodied concept of patriarchal ownership of a woman's means of production, as well as the social power arrangements that patriarchy put upon the world. And so this found expression during the early days of feminism when women that identified with a more traditional comportment related to marriage and related to property were in struggle with women that did not have that same sort of evaluation. So my experiences with feminine were one that were radically grounded in a woman's body, including all of the discomforts that come with not having a conventionally attractive woman's body. That can mean not white. That can mean not thin. That can mean not abled. Struggling to get at peace with our body in a perspective when we're under constant scrutiny, especially from what they used to call the male gaze, that has an expectation not only of how a woman acts, but how she pleases his eyes, how she looks relative to how he looks. He looks better with her if she looks a certain standard. And what happens when that's removed, when it's just women with other women? How do we see each other? How do we want to see each other? How do we want to be seen? Smell. Dance. Move. What's beautiful? Sometimes the unconventional, non-archetypical expressions of female mobility or female presentation have a unique beauty about them when you're not subjected to the same sort of auditing terms that come with the propertied assessment behind the male gaze. I'm just letting you know that this is part of what has sustained me. And even if I might have differences these days with where you are with your own identity politically and what you see as your priorities, I'm still a part of your history and I love you. I love you dearly. I would fight for you. Just so you know,